A great flood drowns the world in stories from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of the Americas. Why do dozens of ancient cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all tell the same story? We are about to journey through 30 ancient civilizations whose myths and legends hint at a lost global connection. By the end, you will see the tapestry of human history woven with threads so similar it defies simple explanation. We will uncover why dragons appear as forces of chaos from Babylon to China, and what the eerie similarities between Egyptian and Mexican gods might truly mean. Does a single, forgotten event lie at the root of all these stories, or is something deeper at work in the human mind? What does it say about us that our oldest stories are so profoundly shared? Long before the pyramids rose from the sands of Egypt, a people known as the Sumerians were building the world's first cities between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It is from their clay tablets pressed with the world's first known writing that we hear some of humanity's oldest stories whispered across time. Their creation epic, the Enuma Elish, does not begin with a single god in a void. Instead, it starts with a swirling, watery chaos, a primordial ocean inhabited by monstrous beings. From this conflict between the earliest gods, the world is literally fashioned from the body of a slain dragon, Tiamat, establishing a pattern of order born from chaos that would echo for millennia. Their pantheon was not of distant, abstract spirits, but of powerful, flawed personalities who governed every aspect of the world. Anu was the father of the gods, ruling the sky, while Enlil was the god of wind and storm, a king whose word could not be overturned. These deities shaped human destiny, yet they also needed humanity to feed them and build their temples. But the most chilling story they passed down is that of the Great Flood. A council of gods, weary of the noise and clamor of humanity, decides to wipe them all out. But one god, Enki, warns the virtuous King Ziusudra, instructing him to build a great boat and save the seeds of all life. The details are unmistakable: a divine warning, a massive vessel, a world-drowning storm, and a bird sent forth to find dry land. This was not a vague legend, it was a detailed historical account to them. The profound question is, how could this foundational narrative, complete with its cosmic battles and world-altering flood, appear here at the dawn of recorded history, only to be found again and again in cultures that should have had no contact with this dusty Mesopotamian plain? Far to the west of Sumer, along the life-giving ribbon of the Nile, another civilization was constructing its own cosmic order from the raw material of myth. The ancient Egyptians envisioned a world perpetually balanced on the edge of chaos and rebirth, a cycle mirrored in their own river's annual flood and the sun's daily journey across the sky. At the heart of this worldview was the dramatic story of Osiris, a tale of murder, resurrection, and the promise of eternal life. Osiris, the wise and good king, was treacherously murdered by his brother Set, the god of chaos and desert storms. His body was dismembered and scattered across Egypt. His devoted wife, the goddess Isis, tirelessly gathered the pieces and through her powerful magic, briefly restored him to life long enough to conceive their son, Horus. Osiris then descended to rule the underworld, becoming the lord of the dead and the judge of souls. This was not merely a story of death, but of triumph over it, establishing a powerful narrative of resurrection that would become central to Egyptian religion for thousands of years. Their son, Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, then waged an epic war against his uncle Set to avenge his father and reclaim the throne. This cosmic struggle between order and chaos, embodied by Horus and Set, was reenacted by every Egyptian pharaoh who was considered the living incarnation of Horus on earth. This divine kingship, where the ruler is a god in human form, is a powerful parallel we will see again in distant lands. Above all these gods sailed Ra, the sun god, who each day was born at dawn, sailed across the sky in his solar bark, and descended into the underworld at dusk to battle the serpent of chaos, Apep, only to be reborn again the next morning. This was a creation story not of a single event, but of a continuous, cyclical battle that had to be won each and every day through ritual and divine effort. How is it that the Egyptians, like the Sumerians, structured their entire understanding of the world around a central conflict between order and chaos, life and death, with a dying and rising god at its core? The echoes are already becoming difficult to ignore. While the Egyptians charted the cosmos with familiar gods, a third great civilization was flourishing in complete silence. The people of the Indus Valley built sprawling, planned cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, with sophisticated plumbing and grid-like streets, yet they left behind a ghost of a culture. Their written language, etched into thousands of small seals, has never been read, locking their stories away forever. But archaeology offers us glimpses, and these glimpses are strangely familiar. One of the most compelling artifacts is a small stone seal depicting a figure seated in a clear yoga-like posture, surrounded by animals. He has 3 faces and wears a headdress with horns, an image that scholars immediately recognized. This is Pashupati, a title meaning Lord of the Animals, and he is an unmistakable prototype for the great Hindu god Shiva, the Lord of meditation, destruction, and rebirth. Here, thousands of years before the Vedas were composed, we see the core idea of a divine, meditative master of the natural world. Then there is the soapstone statue known as the priest king. His serene, bearded face and ornate robe suggest a figure of immense authority, but one that is calm and composed, not a warrior. He embodies a different kind of power, perhaps a priestly ruler who governed through ritual and spiritual connection rather than sheer force. This concept of a god-king, a leader who bridges the human and divine realms, resonates powerfully with the pharaohs of Egypt and the Luguls of Mesopotamia. Without a single deciphered word, we are left to wonder, did the Indus Valley people also tell a story of a great flood, their cities built and rebuilt upon layers of silt? Did they have their own version of the chaos serpent, or a dying and rising god? The silent testimony of their artifacts suggests a spiritual world that was not entirely alien to those of the ancient Near East, raising the possibility of a shared, prehistoric undercurrent of belief that flowed across the ancient world, connecting river valleys that were never supposed to have met. Across the wine-dark sea on the island of Crete, a civilization emerged that defied all expectations. The Minoans built vast, colorful palaces without fortification walls, their walls adorned with frescoes of leaping dolphins and graceful processions. At the heart of their world, both physically and mythologically, stood the labyrinthine palace of Knossos, a structure so complex it would later inspire one of Greece's most enduring legends. The story tells of a monstrous hybrid, the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, imprisoned by King Minos in a vast, inescapable maze designed by the master craftsman Daedalus. Every year, the myth says, 7 youths and 7 maidens from Athens were sent into this labyrinth as a tribute, a sacrifice to the ravenous beast within. This was not just a simple monster tale. It was a story of political power, of a terrifying ritual, and of the ultimate confrontation between the hero Theseus and the chaos of the beast at the civilization's core. The real palace of Knossos, with its countless rooms, twisting corridors, and sudden dead ends, perfectly embodies the legendary labyrinth. To walk its ruins is to feel the myth come alive, the very stones whispering of a place where one could easily become lost, both physically and spiritually. But why a bull? The Minoan obsession with this powerful animal was absolute. Their art is filled with scenes of bull leaping, a breathtakingly dangerous acrobatic ritual where young men and women vaulted over the charge of a massive bull. This was not a slaughter, but a sacred dance with the beast, a display of human courage and agility in the face of raw, untamed power. The bull symbolized strength, fertility, and perhaps a bridge to the divine. This profound bovine symbolism resonates deeply with the bull cults of Anatolia, like the storm god Teshub who stood upon a bull, and even the celestial bull of heaven from Mesopotamian myths. Furthermore, the dominant figure in Minoan religion appears to have been a powerful mother goddess, often depicted holding snakes and flanked by lions, a mistress of the animals not unlike the Indus Valley's Pashupati. She represents a potent, life-giving force, a deity of nature and regeneration. When we see this mother goddess alongside the sacred, dangerous bull, we are looking at a spiritual package that feels strangely familiar across the Eastern Mediterranean. Could the Minotaur itself be a later Greek misinterpretation of a Minoan priest king, or a shaman, performing a ritual while wearing a ceremonial bull's head mask to channel the animal's divine power? The labyrinth then becomes not a prison for a monster, but a sacred, winding path for a spiritual journey. The echoes are no longer faint. From the bull-headed demons of Mesopotamia to the mother goddesses of Anatolia and the divine kings who communed with beasts, a pattern is emerging, one that the seafaring Minoans were very much a part of. But the Minoan labyrinth was not the end of the story in the Aegean. On the Greek mainland, a new, more warlike power rose from the dust, a culture of fortified palace citadels and warrior kings whose echoes would shape Western literature for millennia. These were the Mycenaeans, and their greatest legacy is not found in gold death masks alone, but in the epic poems of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. For a long time, these works were considered pure fiction, fantastical tales of gods and heroes. Then, in the late 19th century, a businessman turned archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, believing the poems were based on historical truth, began to dig. At a site in modern Turkey he believed to be the location of ancient Troy, he found not just one city, but multiple cities built atop one another, one of which showed clear evidence of a massive destruction by fire and war around the time the Trojan War was said to have occurred. He then turned to Greece and uncovered the sprawling, fortified palace complexes of Mycenae and Pylos, the very homes of the legendary King Agamemnon and the wise old King Nestor. Suddenly, the world of Homer had a historical setting. The Mycenaeans were a society built for war, their palaces centered around a great hall or megaron where the Wanax, the king, would hold court. Their extensive records, written in an early form of Greek called Linear B, detail a highly organized bureaucratic state managing vast resources for its military and its powerful, godlike ruler. This is the world of Agamemnon, the high king who could rally all the Greek chieftains for a 10-year campaign against Troy over a single insult, the abduction of Helen. The story is a foundational epic of a civilization defining itself through conflict, honor, and the capricious will of the gods, but the structure of this epic feels strangely familiar. A mighty coalition gathers to besiege a wealthy, fortified city, a conflict sparked by a transgression and prolonged by divine meddling. This is the same narrative framework we find in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero and his friend Enkidu travel to confront the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest, Humbaba, a quest sanctioned by the gods. The heroic archetype itself, the powerful, semi-divine warrior like Achilles, whose rage and prowess decide the fate of armies, mirrors figures like the Sumerian king Gilgamesh or the Hittite storm god Teshub in his battles. Even the journey of Odysseus, a long and arduous voyage home filled with monstrous creatures, seductive goddesses, and a descent into the underworld, follows a mythic template of the hero's quest that appears across cultures. Why would a war supposedly fought in the 12th century before the Common Era share its essential story beats with legends from Anatolia and Mesopotamia, composed centuries earlier and hundreds of miles away? Were these simply universal human stories, or were the Mycenaeans master traders and seafarers, weaving their own local heroes into a narrative pattern that was already ancient, a pattern of conflict, journey, and return that had been circulating across the Eastern Mediterranean for 1,000 years? The Trojan War epic may be the cornerstone of Greek identity, but its literary DNA appears to be a shared inheritance. Deep in the heart of Anatolia, where the landscape is rugged and the winters fierce, the Hittites forged an empire of iron and law. These masters of chariot warfare and diplomacy ruled from their massive stone capital, Hattusa, and their worldview was dominated by a single, powerful force, the storm god Tahana. He was not a distant, philosophical deity, but a god of immediate, visceral power, who wielded a mighty double-headed axe and rode his chariot across the sky, the rumble of its wheels becoming the thunder that shook the very mountains. His primary enemy was not another god, but a monstrous serpent of chaos named Ilianka. The myth of their battle is one of the most complete and dramatic to survive from the Hittite world. In their first confrontation, the great serpent actually defeats the storm god, humiliating him and stealing his heart and eyes. A defeated Tahana must then turn to other gods and a mortal woman for help. The plan involves getting the serpent drunk at a great feast, and when Ilianka is incapacitated by wine, Tahana's son, the weather god of the city of Nerik, is able to bind the monster, allowing Tahana to strike the final, victorious blow. This story is profoundly significant. It is not a simple tale of good versus evil, but one of initial failure, humiliation, and the need for cunning and mortal assistance to ultimately restore order. This narrative of a storm god battling a serpentine embodiment of chaos is a direct parallel to the Babylonian story of Marduk fighting Tiamat, and even the Egyptian tale of Ra battling the serpent Apep each night. The pattern is unmistakable, but the Hittites did more than just tell a similar story. They actively collected the gods of their neighbors. Their capital was a virtual divine metropolis, with temples and rituals dedicated to Hatchan, Hurrian, Mesopotamian, and even Canaanite deities. They recognized the sun goddess of Arina as their paramount deity alongside Tahana, a powerful female solar figure that echoes other ancient mother goddesses. They formally adopted the entire Hurrian pantheon, including the powerful god Teshub, who was so similar to Tahana that they essentially merged into one. This was a deliberate, state-sanctioned policy of religious syncretism, a way of claiming power and legitimacy by absorbing the divine authority of every culture they encountered or conquered. The Hittite Empire was not a closed system, but a great cultural crossroads, a melting pot where myths and gods were traded and blended as freely as spices and metals. Their great library at Hattusa held tablets written in 8 different languages, a testament to their interconnected world. So when we see their storm god battling the chaos serpent, we are not looking at an isolated myth. We are witnessing a single, local version of a story that was being told and retold and adapted across the entire Near East. The Hittites proved that these connections were not accidental similarities, but the result of active, conscious exchange. The question then becomes, how far did this web of shared stories actually stretch? The Hittite capital was a bustling crossroads of gods and stories, but further south, along the sun-drenched coast of the Levant, another people were composing their own thunderous epic. In the ancient city of Ugarit, scribes pressed clay tablets with a cuneiform alphabet, preserving the myths of the Canaanites, and at the heart of their world was a drama of divine power, death, and rebirth centered on the god Bol. He was the rider of the clouds, the bringer of rain and fertility, but his rule was not unchallenged. His first and most terrifying enemy was Yam, the deified sea, a chaotic, primal force of watery chaos. The texts describe a council of gods cowering in fear before Yam's demands, powerless to stop him. It falls to Bol, armed with 2 magical clubs named Driver and Chaser, to confront this liquid monster. In a furious battle, he defeats Yam and establishes his kingship over the gods, bringing order from the watery abyss. This victory is a direct, unmistakable parallel to the Babylonian god Marduk's battle against the saltwater dragon Tiamat. The enemy is the same, the chaotic sea, and the result is the same, the establishment of a stable cosmos ruled by a champion of the gods, but Bol's struggle does not end there. His second, more profound enemy is Mot, the god of death and sterility. Mot, whose name literally means death, challenges Baal's authority and ultimately defeats him, dragging the storm god down into the underworld. With Baal's death, the rains cease, the land withers, and a terrible drought grips the world. The goddess Anat, Baal's sister and avenger, will not accept this. She confronts Mot, and in a scene of shocking violence, she seizes him, splits him with a sword, winnows him like grain, burns him with fire, grinds him between millstones, and scatters his remains over the fields. This ritualistic destruction of death itself allows Baal to return to life, restoring rain and fertility to the world. The cycle is breathtakingly complete. Here we have a storm god who battles a sea monster to become king, only to be killed by a god of death and then resurrected, bringing life back to the earth. This is not just one story, it is two powerful myths fused into one cycle. The battle with the sea serpent echoes Marduk and Tiamat, while the death and resurrection narrative is a near-perfect mirror of the Egyptian story of Osiris, slain by his brother Set and avenged by his wife Isis. How can we explain such a specific combination of themes appearing here, on the coast of the Mediterranean, when the same core ideas were being told in the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt? The Canaanites were master traders, their ports open to ships from across the known world. Their myths were not born in isolation, but were part of a vibrant, ongoing conversation between civilizations, a conversation where the most fundamental questions of life, death, and cosmic order were being answered with strangely similar divine dramas. The Canaanite coast was a vibrant port for shared myths, but the very source of those stories lay further east, in the cradle of civilization itself. In the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, the Akkadians and Babylonians were not just inheriting Sumerian tales, they were refining them into the foundational epic that would ripple across the ancient world. Their greatest literary achievement was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of a powerful but arrogant king of Uruk, 2/3 god and 1/3 man. Gilgamesh abuses his power, so the gods create a wild man, Enkidu, to challenge him. After a titanic struggle, the two become the closest of friends and embark on a series of grand adventures, culminating in the slaying of the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest, Humbaba. This act of defiance against the gods seals their fate. As punishment, Enkidu is sentenced to die a slow, agonizing death. Gilgamesh, devastated by the loss of his friend, is confronted with his own mortality for the very first time. His grief propels him on a desperate, obsessive quest, not for glory, but for the one thing his divine blood cannot grant him: eternal life. He journeys to the ends of the earth, facing monstrous scorpion men and traversing a sunless tunnel, all to find the one man who achieved immortality, the sage Utnapishtim. When Gilgamesh finally finds him, Utnapishtim recounts a story that should sound hauntingly familiar. He tells of a time when the gods decided to send a great flood to wipe out humanity. The god E, much like the Sumerian Enki, warned Utnapishtim in secret, instructing him to build a massive 7-deck ark and to bring the seed of all living creatures aboard. The storm raged for 6 days and 7 nights, wiping out all of mankind. When the waters subsided, Utnapishtim released a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven which did not return, signaling dry land. For his obedience, the gods granted him and his wife the gift of eternal life. This is not a vague parallel, it is the direct literary ancestor of the flood narratives that would later appear in the Canaanite world, the Hebrew Bible, and beyond. Utnapishtim then offers Gilgamesh a test to see if he is truly worthy of immortality. He challenges the weary king to stay awake for just 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh immediately fails, falling into a deep sleep, proving that even the greatest of heroes cannot overcome the fundamental human condition of mortality. He returns to Uruk empty-handed but transformed, finally accepting his fate and taking pride in the mighty walls of his city, a legacy that will endure long after he is gone. The Epic of Gilgamesh is more than a story. It is a philosophical treatise on what it means to be human. It explores friendship, loss, the arrogance of power, and the ultimate futility of cheating death. This specific narrative package, the divine friendship, the quest for life everlasting, and the world-altering flood, became a cultural blueprint. The Hittites translated it, the Canaanites knew it, and its echoes can be felt in the heroic journeys of Homer's Odysseus. How did this one epic, born from the clay of Mesopotamia, become so deeply woven into the mythological fabric of an entire region? The answer lies in the very nature of empires. The Akkadians under Sargon created the world's first multi-ethnic empire, and the Babylonians, with their famous law code of Hammurabi, established a political and cultural dominance that spread their language, their ideas, and their stories across the Near East. Gilgamesh was not just a local hero, he was a universal figure, and his epic was the vessel carrying a Mesopotamian world view far beyond its own rivers, setting the stage for stories we still tell today. The Assyrians took the Babylonian worldview and forged it into a weapon of empire. From their heartland in northern Mesopotamia, they built a military machine of terrifying efficiency, and their mythology was meticulously crafted to serve this relentless expansion. They adopted the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, but reframed its central hero, the god Marduk, elevating their own national god, Ashur, to the supreme position. In the Assyrian version, it was Ashur who rode the divine winds into battle, who slew the dragon Tiamat, and who created the world from her corpse. This was more than a theological tweak, it was a declaration of imperial destiny. By making their god the architect of cosmic order, they justified their own conquests as the divine will of the universe's supreme ruler. The king was not merely Ashur's representative on earth, he was his chief priest and his earthly vessel. His military campaigns a direct extension of the god's eternal war against chaos. This intertwining of divine will and kingship is a powerful echo of the Egyptian pharaoh's role as the living Horus, a concept that would later find new life in the Roman imperial cult. But the Assyrians made their divine authority terrifyingly tangible. Guarding the gates of their colossal palaces and cities were the Lamashu, colossal hybrid creatures with the body of a bull or lion, the wings of an eagle, and the bearded head of a wise king. These were not mere decorations, they were apotropaic guardians designed to ward off demonic forces, both spiritual and human. To approach the Assyrian king, you had to pass under the gaze of these immense, silent sentinels, a visceral reminder that you were entering a domain where the human and divine realms merged into a single, absolute power. The Lamashu possessed 5 legs, so that from the front they appeared resolutely standing guard, while from the side they were captured in a powerful, striding motion. This clever artistic choice meant they were perpetually both stationary and advancing, an eternal, looming presence projecting the unstoppable momentum of the empire itself. These guardian figures find their echoes in the sphinxes of Egypt and the griffins of Minoan Crete, yet the Assyrian version is uniquely imposing, a perfect symbol of a state that derived its legitimacy from a cosmic battle and enforced its rule with stone and iron. The message was unambiguous, the order they imposed upon the world, an order born from a god's victory over a primordial dragon, was absolute and non-negotiable. Yet while Assyrian kings carved their power in stone, a rival power flourished in the shadow of the Zagros Mountains. The Elamites built their civilization in what is now southwestern Iran, a realm often cast as the perennial enemy of Mesopotamia, yet their true role was far more profound. They were master linguists and cultural conduits, speaking a language unrelated to any other known tongue, and developing their own unique, still undeciphered linear script. Their pantheon was headed by a powerful divine couple, the goddess Pinakir and the god Humban. Pinakir was a celestial queen, a mother goddess of the stars and heaven, whose worship sometimes even placed her above her male consort. This echoes the powerful female deities like Ishtar of Mesopotamia and hints at a time when goddesses held supreme authority in the ancient Near East. Humbin, the sky god, was not a warrior like Ashur or Baal, but a judge, a divine arbiter who sanctioned oaths and upheld order. Their most famous king, Untashnaparisha, demonstrated this unique blend of cultures in the magnificent ziggurat he built at Chog-Azanbil. This massive step temple complex was dedicated to the god Inshushinak, the lord of Susa, but its very form was a Mesopotamian architectural idea infused with Elamite spirit. The Elamites were not mere imitators, they were synthesizers. Their kingdom sat directly on the trade routes connecting the urban centers of Mesopotamia with the enigmatic cities of the Indus Valley. It is here, in this forgotten corridor, that we must look for the flow of ideas. Could the horned, meditative figure of the Indus Valley's Pashupati have influenced Elamite conceptions of divinity? Did their own myths of creation and flood travel east and west along these same routes? The Elamites absorbed Mesopotamian cuneiform and myth, yet they stubbornly retained their own language and their own gods, creating a cultural fusion that served as a living bridge. When we see their art with its distinctive serpents and hybrid creatures, we are looking at a filter through which the stories of Sumer and Akkad were passed, perhaps altered, and then carried further into the heart of Asia. The Elamites remind us that the map of ancient myth was not drawn with solid lines, but with these porous, shifting borders where gods and stories were constantly traded, adopted, and reinvented. If their script is ever one day read, what lost chapters in this global story might we finally recover? High in the mountains north of Mesopotamia, the Hurrians wove their own thunderous answer to the question of cosmic origins. Their stories, known as the Kumarbi cycle, present a drama of divine succession so raw and visceral it feels like geology itself. It begins with Alolu, the first king in heaven, who is overthrown by his cupbearer Anu. Anu then rules for 7 or perhaps 9 years before his own cupbearer, the grain god Kumarbi, rises against him. The ensuing battle is one of the most bizarre in all mythology. As Anu tries to flee into the sky, Kumarbi seizes him by the feet, bites off his genitals and swallows them. Kumarbi laughs in triumph, believing he has secured his throne forever, but Anu speaks a curse from the heavens. He tells Kumarbi that he is now pregnant with 3 terrible gods, including the storm god Teshub. Horrified, Kumarbi spits out the seed, but it is too late. The storm god is already growing within him. The solution is equally strange. The gods must cut open Kumarbi's head to allow Teshub to be born. This is not a clean, orderly transfer of power. It is a violent, bodily, and deeply chaotic process where the new ruler literally erupts from the body of the old. The parallels to later Greek myth are so precise they are almost shocking. In Hesiod's Theogony, the sky god Auranos is overthrown by his son Kronos, who castrates him with a sickle. Kronos, in turn, swallows his own children to prevent his overthrow, until his son Zeus is hidden away and later forces Kronos to disgorge his siblings. The sequence is unmistakable, a succession of kingship in heaven achieved through castration and swallowing. The Hurrian myths are not a vague echo, they are the clear, documented precursor. But these stories did not remain locked in the Hurrian highlands. The Hittites, those master collectors of gods, eagerly adopted the entire Kumarbi cycle, translating it into their own language and preserving it in their royal archives at Hattusa. For them, the tale was not just a foreign curiosity, it was a sacred text that explained the rise of their own chief god, the storm god Tahana, who they seamlessly identified with the Hurrian Teshub. This was a living, breathing exchange. A Hurrian myth became a Hittite state narrative, which would, centuries later, provide the foundational structure for the Greek understanding of their own gods. How did this happen? The connections are historical and tangible. The Mycenaean Greeks had trading colonies on the coast of Anatolia, directly in the sphere of Hittite influence. It is along these bustling trade routes through ports like Miletus that these deep, ancient stories of divine rebellion and cosmic order could have traveled, slowly transforming over generations until Kumar became Kronos and Tesha became Zeus. The Kumar cycle demonstrates that the parallels we see are not mere coincidences of the human mind, but the fingerprints of a vast, interconnected mythological network where the foundational stories of the West were forged in the crucible of the ancient Near East. Yet the story of the Hurrians does not end with their myths. To the south, a powerful kingdom emerged that would freeze a moment of astonishing cultural fusion in time. The kingdom of Mitanni, ruled by an elite class of chariot warriors known as the Marianu, spoke a Hurrian language, yet their king swore oaths to gods whose names sound like they belong on the other side of the world. In a famous peace treaty between the Mitanni king and the Hittite emperor, the invoked witnesses include Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nasatya twins. These are not Mesopotamian or Anatolian deities. These are the precise, foundational gods of the ancient Vedic religion, the very pantheon that would give rise to Hinduism in India. Here, in the heart of the Near East around 1400 years before the Common Era, we find the storm god Indra and the cosmic sovereign Varuna being worshipped by the rulers of a major kingdom. This is not a vague similarity, it is a direct linguistic snapshot. The Mitanni elite were not simply aware of these gods, they were central to their royal identity and their most sacred diplomatic vows. This single clay tablet provides undeniable proof of a shared cultural and linguistic heritage that stretches from the plains of Syria to the banks of the Ganges. These rulers were Indo-Aryans, a branch of the wider Indo-European peoples who had migrated into the region and imposed their martial culture and their gods upon a predominantly Hurrian-speaking population. Their greatest gift to the region was the light, horse-drawn war chariot, a revolutionary technology that changed the face of ancient warfare. But they brought more than just hardware, they brought their poetry, their rituals, and their divine pantheon. This means that the mythological roots of India and the roots of Mycenaean Greece, Hittite Anatolia, and Mitanni Syria all spring from the same deep Proto-Indo-European well. How is it possible that the same god, the sky-father Dyaus Pitta in Sanskrit, becomes Zeus Pater in Greek and Jupiter in Latin? The Mitanni Treaty is the missing link, the historical anchor that shows this was not a slow, coincidental evolution, but the result of real people moving across continents carrying their stories with them. They were the living bridge long before the history books said such a bridge could exist, connecting worlds that were never supposed to have met. A new kind of empire was rising in the highlands of Iran, one that would bind the ancient world from the Indus to the Nile under a single, unprecedented rule. The Persian Empire, under visionary kings like Cyrus the Great, was built not just on military might, but on a revolutionary principle of tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to keep their own gods and customs. Yet at the very heart of this sprawling, multicultural state pulsed a religion with a starkly simple and powerful worldview, Zoroastrianism. Its prophet, Zarathustra, taught that the universe was not a playground for squabbling, flawed deities, but the stage for a single, all-encompassing cosmic war. On one side stood Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, the uncreated god of light, truth, and order. Arrayed against him was his eternal adversary, Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, the embodiment of darkness, deceit, and chaos. This was not a temporary squabble, it was the fundamental reality of existence, a dualistic struggle that permeated every aspect of life, from the grand movements of the stars to the smallest moral choice in a person's heart. Every human being was a soldier in this war, and their thoughts, words, and deeds were either weapons for the forces of light or reinforcements for the armies of darkness. This was a dramatic departure from the cyclical battles of Egyptian and Mesopotamian gods. In Zoroastrianism, history had a direction and a final, definitive purpose. The world was moving toward a final, cataclysmic battle, a great renovation where Ahura Mazda would ultimately triumph, evil would be utterly destroyed, and the world would be made perfect and everlasting. This linear view of time, this concept of a final judgment and an end to history itself, was a radical new idea. How could such a specific and profound theological framework, born in the Persian heartland, echo so powerfully in the later beliefs of the Jewish captives in Babylon, in the Christian vision of Armageddon, and in the Islamic Day of Judgment? The Persian Empire was the vessel, its royal roads and administrative efficiency allowing these transformative ideas to travel across continents. The struggle between a wise creator god and a destructive spirit of evil, the idea of a savior figure born of a virgin, the resurrection of the dead, and a final fiery purification of the world, these were not isolated inventions. They were core Zoroastrian doctrines that seemed to have seeped into the very bedrock of Western eschatology. The Persians provided the political and cultural bridge, but Zoroastrianism offered the spiritual blueprint for a war of good versus evil that would shape the faith of billions. Far to the east of Mitanni, in the lush river valleys of the Indian subcontinent, the Vedic civilization was composing a spiritual canon that would echo for millennia. Theirs was a world of fire and sacrifice, of nomadic pastoralists slowly settling into a new homeland, and their most profound thoughts were preserved in the Rigveda, a vast collection of over 1,000 hymns composed in an archaic form of Sanskrit. This was not a single narrative epic, but a poetic tapestry of praise and inquiry directed at the forces of nature, deified into a powerful pantheon. At the head of this pantheon strode Indra, the king of the gods, a boisterous and powerful warrior. His defining myth recounts his epic battle against Vritra, a monstrous serpent coiled around a mountain, holding back the cosmic waters and paralyzing the world in drought. Armed with his thunderbolt, the Vajra, Indra smashes the serpent, releasing the life-giving waters and the dawn, thus freeing creation itself. The parallels are breathtaking. Here in ancient India, we find a storm god using a divine weapon to slay a serpent of chaos holding back the waters, a story we have already heard in the myths of Baal, Teshub, and Marduk. But the connections run even deeper than the story. The language of the Rigveda itself provides the key. The name of the sky god, Dyaus Pitta, translates directly to Sky Father, a precise linguistic match for the Greek Zeus Pater and the Roman Jupiter. The Vedic fire god, Agni, whose name shares a root with the Latin ignis for fire, was the essential mediator between gods and men, carrying the offerings of sacrificial butter upward in his smoke. The god Mitra, a divine overseer of contracts and friendships, is the same figure we met in the Mitanni treaties. These are not just similar concepts, they are the same gods, their names and core functions preserved across thousands of miles and centuries of separation. This is the legacy of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a shared ancestral culture whose language and myths fractured and spread, from the cold fjords of Scandinavia to the warm shores of the Mediterranean and the plains of India. The Vedic hymns are not an isolated tradition, but one branch of an immense ancient family tree. When the Rigveda describes the sacrifice of the cosmic giant Purusha, from whose body the entire world and the four social classes are formed, we hear a distant cousin to the Norse myth of Ymir and the Babylonian creation from Tiamat's corpse. Why would the foundational texts of Hinduism share such deep, structural roots with the myths of Greece, Persia, and the Norse? The Vedic civilization stands as a monumental testament to this forgotten kinship, proving that the threads of our oldest stories are woven from a common, prehistoric source, a source whose echoes would one day be carried across the Himalayas and into the heart of China. But what happens when we cross an ocean? The world of the Olmecs erupts from the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, a civilization so foundational it is called the mother culture of the Americas. Their most iconic legacies are the colossal stone heads, 17 of them discovered to date, each carved from a single basalt boulder, some weighing over 20 tons. These are not idealized gods, but portraits of powerful, individual rulers with full lips, broad noses, and distinctive headgear, their faces set in expressions of serene and immense authority. To stand before one is to feel the weight of a real person's gaze across 3,000 years. Yet for all their tangible human presence, the Olmec spiritual world was dominated by a creature of profound and terrifying power, the jaguar. They did not simply worship the animal, they envisioned a transformative being, a word jaguar, a hybrid of human and beast. This figure appears everywhere in their art, from tiny jade carvings to massive altar sculptures, often depicted as an infant with a snarling jaguar's mouth, a cleft head, and a downturned expression of fury or pain. This was not a random monster, it was a central mythic motif, a being born from the union of a woman and a jaguar, embodying the raw, untamed forces of nature and the shamanic ability to cross the boundary between the human and animal realms. The jaguar, as the apex predator of the jungle, was the master of the night, the underworld, and the regenerative power of the earth. The word jaguar, therefore, was likely a symbol of royal lineage and shamanic transformation, a way for a ruler to claim the fearsome power and spiritual authority of the jungle's true king. This concept of a lord of the animals, a being who masters the beast to mediate between worlds, is a stunning parallel to the Indus Valley's Pashupati seal, the meditative figure surrounded by creatures. Here, separated by two vast oceans and thousands of years, we see the same core idea manifesting, one in a posture of calm mastery, the other in a visage of ferocious, innate power. The Olmec word jaguar did not vanish with its creators. It evolved, its essence flowing directly into the pantheons of later Mesoamerican civilizations. It becomes the Maya's jaguar god of the underworld, the fierce son of the night who travels through the realm of the dead. It transforms into the Aztec Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, a god of destiny and sorcery whose nagual or animal spirit was the jaguar. The Olmecs established a spiritual template where divine power was inseparable from the transformative might of the great cat. How can we explain the appearance of this specific, complex idea in a land that, according to traditional history, had been isolated from the ancient world for millennia? The colossal heads stand as silent, monumental sentinels, while the word jaguar snarls a question we are only beginning to understand. Deep in the humid heart of the Mesoamerican jungle, the Maya built a civilization of staggering intellectual and spiritual complexity. Their worldview, preserved in the sacred book the Popol Vuh, presents a creation story that rivals any from the ancient world in its drama and depth. It begins not with a single act of will, but with a quiet, persistent longing. The sky was empty, and the face of the earth was not yet clear. Only the vast sea and the primordial sky existed, and within them the first gods, shrouded in green and blue feathers, simply waited. Their first attempts at creation were failures. They commanded the earth to rise and animals emerged, but these creatures could only squawk and chatter, unable to speak their names or praise the gods. Dissatisfied, the gods tried again, this time fashioning beings from mud. These figures simply crumbled and dissolved, their minds too waterlogged to understand anything. A third attempt, carving people from wood, produced hollow, soulless beings who forgot their makers and were ultimately destroyed, their descendants said to be the monkeys in the trees. This series of failed creations, this divine trial and error, reveals a profound truth. For the Maya, humanity's purpose was intrinsically linked to its ability to worship, to remember, and to understand its place in the cosmos. The true, successful humans were finally fashioned from white and yellow corn, the sacred substance that was the very flesh of the gods themselves. This was a people who believed they were literally made of sacred food, a concept that connected them directly to the earth and the divine in a cycle of sustenance and sacrifice. The heart of the Popol Vuh, however, is the epic saga of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Expalanque. Their father and uncle, themselves great ball players, had been tricked and executed by the arrogant lords of the Maya underworld, a foul and decaying realm called Xibalba. The lords hung the severed head of one brother in a calabash tree, and from that head the hero twins were miraculously conceived. They grew to become master ball players and tricksters themselves, deliberately angering the lords of Xibalba to be summoned down into the darkness. Their journey through the underworld is a masterclass in mythic storytelling, a series of deadly tests set by the death gods. They are sent to the House of Gloom, the House of Cold, the House of Jaguars, and the House of Fire, but through their wits and supernatural aid, they survive everyone. The climax comes when they allow themselves to be sacrificed by the underworld lords. After being burned and their bones ground and thrown into a river, they are reborn first as fishmen and then as poor, wandering performers. In their final, ultimate trick, they perform miracles for the death gods, dancing, setting houses on fire and restoring them, and even sacrificing a dog and bringing it back to life. Amazed, the lords of Xibalba demand to be sacrificed and brought back to life themselves. The twins oblige, but this time they leave the lords dead, defeated by their own arrogance and the twins' superior magic. This victory over the forces of death did not mean the end of dying, but it did establish the proper order of the world. The twins ascended to become the sun and the moon, and their father was resurrected as the maize god, ensuring the cycle of life, death, and rebirth would continue forever. This entire cosmic drama was mirrored in a very real and terrifyingly physical ritual, the Maya ball game. Played in massive stone courts that represented the cosmos, the game was far more than sport. It was a reenactment of the hero twins' struggle in Xibalba, a battle between the opposing forces of life and death, darkness and light. Players used their hips, elbows, and knees to drive a heavy solid rubber ball through a stone ring set high on a wall, a task of immense difficulty. The ball itself symbolized the sun on its perilous journey through the underworld each night. The outcome of the game was a matter of cosmic consequence, and for the players on the losing team, the price could be the ultimate sacrifice. To be decapitated on the ball court was not a mark of shame, but a sacred honor, a direct imitation of the maize god's death and resurrection that ensured the sun would rise again and the crops would grow. This intricate connection between a sporting event, mythology, and the very survival of the world is a uniquely Mayan expression of a universal theme, the ritualized struggle to maintain cosmic order. Beyond their myths, the Maya gazed at the stars and devised a cosmology of breathtaking sophistication. Their long-count calendar measured vast cycles of time with a precision that rivals our own, each cycle culminating in a renewal, not an end. This concept of cyclical time, of worlds being destroyed and reborn in great ages, is a profound parallel to the Hindu and Buddhist concept of the Kalpa, an immense period of time marking the creation and dissolution of a universe. For the Maya, as for the ancient thinkers of India, time was not a straight line marching toward a single conclusion. It was a great turning wheel of eras where the patterns of gods and heroes, creation and destruction, repeated across epochs. How is it possible that two civilizations, separated by the largest ocean on the planet, both arrived at this same abstract, complex understanding of temporal reality? The Maya saw this cycle everywhere, in the daily death and rebirth of the sun, in the seasonal cycle of the corn plant, and in the very story of the hero twins. Their entire existence was a delicate dance within this eternal circle, a dance where myth, astronomy, and the very substance of their bodies were all woven from the same sacred, cyclical thread. The Mayan vision of cyclical time was not a solitary echo in the Americas. To the north, in the highland basin of Mexico, the Aztecs crafted a creation story of such cosmic violence and renewal that it defined their very existence. Their universe was not stable, but a fragile, temporary balance haunted by the ghosts of previous worlds. They believed we are all living in the fifth and final age, the era of the fifth sun. But the 4 suns that came before ours had all been violently destroyed, each catastrophe wiping the slate of the world clean. The first age, the sun of earth, was ruled by the god Tezcatlipoca. Its people were giants who fed on pine nuts, but this world was consumed when Tezcatlipoca, losing a cosmic game with his rival Quetzalcoatl, was knocked from the sky by a giant jaguar. The jaguars then descended and devoured every last giant. The second age, the sun of wind, was governed by Quetzalcoatl. This world was swept away by monstrous hurricanes, its people transformed into monkeys who clung to the trees to survive. The third age, the sun of fire rain, was ruled by the rain god Tlaloc. It was ended by a global rain of fire, a torrent of molten rock that forced its people to become the birds of the air. The fourth age, the sun of water, was presided over by Tlaloc's wife, the goddess Chalchutlicue. This world drowned in a great flood, its people turning into the fish of the sea. This staggering sequence of global cataclysms, of worlds destroyed by jaguars, wind, fire, and water, resonates with uncanny power across the planet. It is the great flood of Mesopotamia, the rain of fire from Sodom and Gomorrah, the world-ending winters of Norse Ragnarok, and the cyclical dissolutions of Hindu cosmology. Why would cultures with no possible contact all envision the past as a graveyard of failed worlds, each annihilated by a different elemental force? The Aztecs believed our own fifth sun, the sun of movement ruled by the god Tonatiuh, is destined to end in a cataclysm of earthquakes. But this fragile existence came with a terrible price. The myth tells of the gods gathering at the ancient city of Teotihuacan to create the fifth sun. The proud god Tecusistecatl volunteered to leap into a great divine bonfire to become the new sun, but when the moment came, he hesitated 4 times in fear. The humble, diseased god Nanahuatzin, covered in boils, did not hesitate. He gathered his courage and threw himself into the flames, emerging as the brilliant sun. Seeing this, ashamed Tecusistecatl leaped in after him, becoming a second, equally bright sun. The other gods knew that 2 suns of equal power could not exist. So one of them took a rabbit and threw it at Tecusistecatl, dimming his face and turning him into the moon. Yet the sun, now alone in the sky, refused to move. It hung motionless, demanding payment for its sacrifice. The gods realized that to set the cosmos in motion, to give life to this new age, they had to offer their own blood and hearts. They had to die so that the sun might live and move across the sky. This foundational act established the central, chilling principle of Aztec life. The sun was not a distant, self-sustaining star. It was a dying god, a divine victim, whose journey across the sky was powered by the most precious substance in the universe, human life force. The sun required a constant offering of human hearts, the chalchihuah, or precious cactus fruit, and human blood, the sacred water, to stave off the inevitable earthquakes that would end this age. Human sacrifice was not merely an act of brutality, it was a profound cosmic duty. It was a sacred debt, a reciprocity with the divine. The victim was not a criminal or a slave in the modern sense, but a Teotl Ixiptla, a god impersonator, a person who, for a brief, terrifying moment, became the god themselves before their heart was offered to the sun. This concept of sacrificial renewal is a dark mirror of themes found across the ancient world. The dying and rising gods of the Near East, like Osiris and Baal, whose deaths and resurrections brought fertility to the land. The Norse god Odin, who sacrificed his own eye and hung himself on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 nights to gain the wisdom of the runes. The self-sacrifice of the Hindu primal being, Purusha, from whose body the entire universe was formed. These are all stories where creation and continued existence are bought with a price, where life is sustained by a willing or unwilling offering of life itself. For the Aztecs, this was not a metaphor from a long-forgotten past. It was the daily, desperate reality of their empire, a ritual engine running at a fever pitch to hold back the eternal darkness. The sheer scale of their practice was a direct, terrifying response to a cosmological truth they believed was inescapable. The sun would not rise on its own, it had to be fed, and the cost of another day was a human heart. High in the Andes, where the air is thin and the mountains touch the sky, the Inca Empire traced its divine origins to the shores of the world's highest navigable lake. From the deep, dark waters of Lake Titicaca, the creator god Viracocha emerged into a world of primordial darkness. His first act was not one of battle or conflict, but of pure, unadulterated thought. He commanded the sun, the moon, and the stars to rise into the void, bringing light and order to the cosmos. Then, from the very stones of the earth, he fashioned a race of giant beings. But this first creation was a failure. These giants were unruly and disobedient, so Viracocha summoned a great flood to wash them away, transforming the few who remained into the stone monoliths that still dot the landscape. He then began his work anew, this time sculpting smaller, more manageable humans from clay. He painted each group with their own distinct clothing and language, giving them the seeds of plants and the knowledge of crafts before sending them forth through subterranean passages to emerge from caves, springs, and mountains across the land, thus populating the world. This was a creation born from intellect and command, a world spoken into existence. The echo here is not of a storm god battling a dragon, but of something even more profound. The Egyptian god Ptah, worshipped at Memphis, was believed to have created the world by conceiving it in his heart and then bringing it into being with his spoken word. The divine utterance, the logos of Greek philosophy, and the famous opening of the Gospel of John all resonate with this same foundational idea that a supreme consciousness can fashion reality through thought and speech. Why would a creator god in the high Andes share this specific, abstract method of creation with deities from the other side of the world? Viracocha, whose name translates to foam of the sea, was not a god who remained to rule. After his work was complete, he traveled across the land, teaching humanity the foundations of civilization, before walking away across the Pacific Ocean, promising one day to return. This image of a civilizing god who departs over the water is a powerful motif that would later shape an entire continent's destiny. When the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma initially mistook the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés for the returning god Quetzalcoatl. The Inca, masters of a vast and rugged empire, built their entire society on the principle that their ruler, the Sopa Inca, was the direct descendant of the sun, a living link back to Viracocha's ordered cosmos. From the chaos of a dark lake, a god of pure mind brought forth a world with a word, a story of Genesis that feels hauntingly familiar in a language no one ever taught him to speak. The desert floor itself became the canvas for one of the world's most cryptic mythologies. Far to the west of the Inca heartland, on the stark, arid plains of southern Peru, the Nazca people etched a sprawling, monumental gallery into the earth. For centuries, these immense geoglyphs remained invisible, their true scale only revealed to the modern world with the advent of flight. From the ground, they are little more than shallow grooves in the reddish-brown pebbles, but from above, they explode into a menagerie of staggering precision. A hummingbird with a beak longer than a football field stretches its wings. A spider, a monkey with a coiled tail, a killer whale, and a strange humanoid figure nicknamed the astronaut all stand frozen in time. These are not small drawings, they are colossal landscape art, some lines running straight for miles across the desert floor. The sheer effort involved is staggering, requiring the removal of thousands of tons of dark surface stones to reveal the lighter-colored sand beneath, a process maintained for over 1,000 years. But what was their purpose if no one but the gods could ever see the full picture? One enduring theory suggests they were a giant astronomical calendar, their lines pointing to celestial events on the horizon, marking the solstices and the rise of important constellations. The spider, for instance, has been identified as a precise representation of the Orion constellation. while the monkey may correlate to the Pleiades star cluster, which held great significance for Andean agricultural cycles. Another compelling idea posits that the lines were ritual pathways walked by priests during sacred ceremonies to invoke the deities or spirits represented by the animal figures. Water, or rather the desperate need for it in one of the driest places on Earth, is central to this interpretation. Many of the animal glyphs are linked to water in Nazca iconography. The hummingbird and the monkey were seen as symbols of fertility and rain, while the killer whale was a powerful deity of the ocean, the ultimate source of all water. By walking the lines of these beings, the Nazca may have been performing a powerful form of sympathetic magic, a ritual plea to the gods to bring life-giving water from the mountains or the sea. This connects their mysterious art directly to the broader Andean worldview, where the Apus or mountain spirits controlled the weather and proper ritual was essential for survival. The geoglyphs, then, were not mere pictures. They were a sacred text written on the land itself, a permanent, ritual landscape designed to maintain the delicate balance of the cosmos and ensure the continuation of life in an unforgiving environment. Their myths were not inscribed on clay tablets, but on the very skin of the earth, a silent, sprawling prayer for water, fertility, and cosmic order that we are only now beginning to decipher. North of the Nazca, along the arid coastal valleys of Peru, the Moch people built a civilization of blood and clay. They left behind no written records, but they were master storytellers in ceramic, their pottery vessels depicting everything from erotic scenes to intricate surgeries with a stunning realism. On the walls of their massive adobe pyramids, like the Huaca de la Luna, they painted their gods in vivid color. It is here, in this silent archive of art, that we find a narrative as dark and compelling as any from the ancient world. The central figure of their mythology was Ai-Apik, the fanged deity, often depicted with the fierce face of a jaguar, the whiskers of a sea lion, and the curling tentacles of an octopus. He was a creator god, but also a decapitator, a being of immense power who demanded a terrible price for his blessings. The most famous depiction of his cult is the sacrifice ceremony, a scene shown repeatedly on fine-line pottery and grand murals. In this ritual, captured warriors from rival valleys are brought before a hierarchy of priests and a central figure often called the warrior priest. The prisoners have their throats cut, and their blood is collected in a tall, ceremonial goblet. This chalice is then presented to the principal priest, who offers the life-giving substance to the fanged deity, Ai-Apik. Why would a civilization go to such lengths to portray this act of ritual killing over and over again? This was not random violence. It was a deeply structured ceremony, a sacred drama that reenacted a cosmic contract. The Moch believed that the world was sustained by a cycle of reciprocity, a debt that had to be paid with the most valuable currency, human life. The blood of strong, vigorous warriors was the ultimate offering, a powerful substance that nourished the gods and ensured the fertility of the land, the flow of water, and the stability of the cosmos. This concept of life for life, of a divine hunger that must be satisfied, resonates with a chilling familiarity. It is the same principle that drove the Aztec sacrifices to the sun god Tonatiuh, and it echoes the foundational myth of the Norse gods who sustained the world tree Yggdrasil by sprinkling it with the blood of a wise being. Even the story of Abraham's near sacrifice of his son Isaac in the Hebrew Bible revolves around this same terrifying theme of divine demand for a life. The Moch, isolated by oceans, arrived at the same spiritual conclusion as civilizations across the globe, that order is purchased with sacrifice. Their art does not shy away from the consequences of failing this duty. Murals at Huaca de la Luna show a deity known as the Decapitator, a figure holding a toomey knife in one hand and a severed head in the other, standing amidst scenes of torrential rain and flooding. This suggests they believed that neglecting the sacrificial ritual would lead not to drought, but to a destructive deluge, a punishment from the gods for breaking the sacred pact. The Moch world was a precarious balance, maintained by a ceremony of blood that connected the power of their warrior elite directly to the will of the fanged god. In their silent pottery, we hear the same question that whispered through the temples of Mesopotamia and the ball courts of Mesoamerica. How far are we willing to go to keep our world from falling into chaos? While the Moch shaped their world with blood and clay, another civilization on the opposite side of the planet was seeking answers in fire and bone. In the fertile Yellow River Valley, the Shang dynasty established China's first historically verified kingdom, a society where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin and constantly negotiated. At the pinnacle of their spiritual world stood Shangdi, the Lord on high, a remote and powerful deity who controlled victory in battle, the harvest, and the fate of the kingdom itself. But Shangdi was not directly approached. Instead, the Shang kings communicated with a vast host of ancestral spirits who acted as divine intermediaries. The king's own deceased ancestors held immense power in the spiritual realm, and their favor was essential for maintaining order on earth. This profound veneration of ancestors created a seamless continuum between the living and the dead, where every major decision, from going to war to planting crops, required the approval of those who had come before. The very stability of the state depended on this ongoing conversation across the veil of death. To facilitate this dialogue, the Shang developed a complex and meticulous form of divination known as pyromancy. The ritual was precise. A royal diviner would address a specific question to a particular ancestor, inscribing it precisely onto a carefully prepared animal bone, most often the shoulder bone of an ox or the plastron of a turtle. Then, using a hot bronze rod, they would apply intense heat to hollows carved into the back of the bone. The stress from the heat would cause the bone to crack on the obverse side with a loud pop. The pattern of these cracks, their direction, length, and shape, was believed to be the direct written response from the spirit world, a message from the ancestors themselves. The diviner would then interpret these cracks, and often the outcome of the prophecy was later carved directly onto the bone next to the original question, creating a permanent record of divine consultation. Is it not astonishing that this practice, so central to Shang statecraft, finds a direct conceptual parallel in the hepatoscopy of ancient Mesopotamia? There, diviners known as Baru priests would examine the livers of sacrificed sheep, reading the lobes, the gallbladder, and the portal vein as a map of divine will, a text written by the gods in the organ believed to be the seat of life itself. Two civilizations completely isolated by geography, both developed the core idea that the gods communicated their intentions through patterns found within the natural world, specifically within the bodies of animals. For the Mesopotamians, the liver was a clay tablet from the gods. For the Shang, the bone was a messaging medium for the ancestors. This shared belief in a legible universe where the divine will could be decoded from cracks and marks suggests a fundamental human impulse to find order and meaning in the seemingly random chaos of nature. The oracle bones of the Shang are more than historical artifacts. They are the first written records of Chinese civilization, preserving the concerns of a kingly court forever bound to its past. They sought answers in the smoke and the sound of splitting bone, listening for the whispers of their forebears, a practice that connected them in spirit to diviners thousands of miles away who were staring into the very same mysteries. The Shang kings listened to the cracking of bones for divine approval, but a new power was rising along the western frontier that would challenge this entire system. The Zhou people, initially subjects of the Shang, launched a successful rebellion, toppling the dynasty that had seemed so firmly anchored by its ancestral spirits. Such an act required more than military might. It demanded a profound moral and cosmological justification. The Zhou answer was the mandate of heaven, a revolutionary political doctrine that would shape Chinese thought for 3,000 years. They argued that heaven, Tian, did not grant eternal power to any one family. Instead, heaven bestowed its mandate on a ruler based solely on his virtue and his ability to govern for the welfare of the people. A just and competent king enjoyed heaven's favor, which manifested as peace, good harvests, and social order. But a ruler who became corrupt, selfish, or incompetent would lose that mandate. Signs of its withdrawal were unmistakable: natural disasters like floods and famines, peasant revolts, and ultimately military defeat. The Zhou claimed the Shang kings had descended into drunkenness and decadence, neglecting their duties and oppressing the common people. Therefore, heaven had revoked their right to rule and transferred it to the virtuous Zhou. This was a brilliant piece of political theology. It legitimized their own coup while simultaneously creating a perpetual check on the power of all future emperors. The ruler was not a god, but heaven's appointed steward, and his continued rule depended entirely on his moral conduct. This concept of a conditional divine right resonates powerfully across the ancient world. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus, a god himself responsible for maintaining Mat, the cosmic order of truth and balance. If chaos, drought, or invasion struck, it was a sign that the pharaoh had failed in his divine duty, that Mat had been disrupted. In Mesopotamia, kings from Hammurabi onward portrayed themselves as the chosen stewards of the gods, tasked with enforcing divine law and justice on earth. Their legitimacy flowed from their service to a higher power. The mandate of heaven shares this core structure. A ruler's authority is derived from a cosmic source and is contingent upon upholding a universal moral and natural order. Yet the Chinese concept is uniquely impersonal. Heaven was not a capricious deity like the Babylonian Marduk, who needed to be fed and flattered. It was an almost mechanistic moral force, a cosmic principle that responded predictably to virtue and vice. This idea that political upheaval was not a sin but a cosmic correction, a reset of the natural order, made dynastic cycles a fundamental part of Chinese history. How is it that civilizations as distinct as those on the Nile, the Tigris, and the Yellow River all converged on the idea that their ruler's primary function was to be a linchpin between the human and divine realms, and that his failure would bring the entire world into chaos? The mandate of heaven was more than a clever excuse for rebellion. It was China's specific answer to a universal ancient question: what gives one person the right to rule over millions, and what happens when they prove unworthy of that sacred trust? South of the Egyptian border, where the Nile carves its way through golden deserts, the kingdom of Kush forged an empire from both imitation and defiance. For centuries, Kush was the southern neighbor that Egypt both feared and coveted, a land rich in gold and powerful archers. At times, Kush was a province of Egypt, its people absorbing the religion and customs of their northern masters. At other times, the tables turned completely, and the kings of Kush marched north to conquer Egypt itself, ruling as its 25th dynasty, the famed Black Pharaohs. This deep, intertwined history meant that Kushite religion was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of Egyptian belief but dyed in distinctly Nubian colors. They worshipped the great Egyptian state gods Ammon, Isis, and Osiris, building vast temples to them. But they were not mere copyists. Their own gods stood proudly beside the Egyptian pantheon, and none was more powerful or uniquely Kushite than Apedemak. He was a god of war and fertility, depicted with the magnificent, fearsome head of a lion on the body of a man, often shown clutching prisoners of war or holding a giant bow. Unlike the Egyptian gods, who were often serene and distant, Apedemak was a god of immediate, visceral power, a divine embodiment of the Kushite kingdom's own martial strength and sovereignty. His main temple at Nokka is a masterpiece of this cultural fusion, its entrance flanked by massive stone elephants, purely African symbols of immense power, while its interior walls are carved with scenes of the lion-headed god receiving offerings from a Kushite king dressed in the regalia of an Egyptian pharaoh. This was a deliberate statement. We are powerful enough to adopt your symbols, but our strength flows from our own gods, from the lion of the desert, not the falcon of the Nile. Even their pyramids, built as tombs for their kings and queens, tell this story of selective adaptation. They are steeper, more sharply angled than their Egyptian counterparts, a unique architectural signature in the Nubian sand. Why would a civilization so deeply immersed in Egyptian culture feel the need to create its own parallel pantheon? The answer lies in the very nature of identity. To rule Egypt, the Kushite pharaohs had to present themselves as the legitimate heirs to the throne of Horus. But back in their homeland, they needed to be seen as the chosen of Apedemak, the true kings of Nubia. Their mythology was a tool of statecraft, a way to claim equality with their northern neighbors while fiercely asserting their own independence. The lion god was their declaration that they were not just students of Egypt, but rivals to its power, a mighty kingdom with its own divine mandate written in the roar of a predator. High on the sun-scorched plateaus of northern Ethiopia, a kingdom rose that would claim a legacy of divine kingship unlike any other. The Aksumite Empire built towering stone obelisks that pierced the sky, monuments to its power that still stand as silent witnesses to a forgotten glory. But its most enduring claim to fame is not carved from stone, but woven from sacred legend. Aksum's rulers professed a direct, bloodline descent from the union of the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This was their foundational myth, a story of immense political and spiritual power that connected their African kingdom directly to the heart of Jerusalem's temple. According to the Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic, the Queen of Sheba traveled to Jerusalem, was awed by Solomon's wisdom, and converted to the worship of the one true God. From their union was born a son, Menelik. When Menelik came of age, he journeyed to visit his father in Jerusalem. Solomon welcomed him, but Menelik decided to return to his mother's kingdom. In a moment of profound consequence, he was accompanied back to Aksum by a group of Israelite nobles, and they did not come empty-handed. The legend states that Menelik's companions, guided by divine will, secretly took the Ark of the Covenant from the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple and brought it to Ethiopia. The very vessel containing the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, the throne of God on earth, was now, according to this tradition, housed not in Jerusalem, Babylon, or Rome, but in a chapel in the highlands of Africa. To this day, a single guardian, a virgin monk, is appointed to watch over the sacred relic within the chapel of the tablet adjacent to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum. No one else is permitted to see it. This is not a marginal belief, but a central tenet of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and a cornerstone of national identity. Why would a powerful empire, a contemporary of Rome and Persia, anchor its legitimacy in a stolen relic from a distant land? The answer lies in the transformative power of the story itself. By claiming the Ark, the Aksumite kings were doing more than just acquiring a holy object. They were transferring the very seat of God's covenant from the old Israel to a new Israel, their own kingdom. They were asserting that the divine promise had moved, that they were the new chosen people, the legitimate heirs to God's favor. This narrative brilliantly bridged the Judaic and African traditions, creating a unique form of Christianity that retained deep Old Testament practices, including dietary laws and the observance of the Sabbath. The Solomonic lineage provided an unbroken chain of divine right to rule, a concept that resonates with the pharaohs of Egypt and the mandate of heaven in China. Yet here it was fused with the specific, tangible power of the Ark. This was a celestial kingship backed by the ultimate physical proof. How does a civilization command such authority? It writes itself into the oldest and most powerful stories it knows, claiming not just a place in history, but a central role in the divine plan itself. The wild, misty shores of Iron Age Europe were home to a people whose myths were as untamed as their lands. The Celtic tribes from Gaul to the British Isles saw the world as a place of profound magic, where every grove and spring pulsed with spirit. Their most complete mythological treasure survives in Ireland, a saga known as the mythological cycle. It tells of the arrival of the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Donu, a race of divine beings who came to Ireland in a magical mist. They did not conquer with simple force, but with 4 legendary treasures, including the unbreakable spear of Lug and the stone of destiny that would cry out under the rightful king. Their story is one of epic battles against the monstrous one-eyed Fomorians, a struggle between the forces of light, skill, and fertility, and the powers of blight, darkness, and chaos. This cosmic conflict between 2 supernatural races mirrors the great godly wars we have already seen, from the Olympians battling the Titans in Greece to the Aesir fighting the Vanir in the Norse tales. Yet the Celtic gods were uniquely fluid. They were shape-shifters and masters of illusion. The Morrigan, the great phantom queen, was a triple goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty. She could appear as a beautiful young woman washing a warrior's armor in a stream, a dire omen of his impending death. She could transform into a terrifying crow circling the battlefield, reveling in the carnage. Or she could be a great wolf, her howls dictating the tide of combat. This ability to flow between forms, to be both alluring and horrifying, gives Celtic mythology its raw, unpredictable energy. The Dagda, the good god, was a father figure who carried a massive club that could kill with one end and resurrect with the other, and owned a cauldron of plenty that no company could ever empty. He was a deity of immense power and earthy appetites, a stark contrast to the more refined Olympian Zeus, yet both were paternal sky fathers of their respective pantheons. This fluidity of form and function is a powerful parallel to the Norse god Odin, who wandered the world as an old man in a cloak, and to the Greek sea god Proteus, who could change his shape to avoid capture. Why do these pantheons, from the cold north to the Mediterranean sun, share this core idea that divinity is not fixed but mutable? For the Celts, it reflected a world view where the boundary between the human world and the other world was tissue-thin, where a god could be your ally one moment and your doom the next, as changeable as the weather over their green hills. The stories of the Tuatha De Danann are not just tales of magic. They are a profound exploration of a universe where power, identity, and even the gods themselves are in a state of constant, beautiful, and terrifying flux. Fire and ice once met in a void of nothingness, and from that impossible collision, the Norse cosmos roared to life. In the frozen north, where the sea could freeze in a single night and the sun vanished for months, the Vikings crafted a mythology as stark and powerful as their landscape. Their stories, preserved in the 13th century prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson, begin not with a benevolent creator but with elemental forces. The realm of fire, Muspelheim, and the world of ice, Niflheim, existed at opposite ends of the great void, Ginnungagap. Where their heat and cold met, the ice dripped, and from those melting drops formed the first giant, Ymir, and a massive cow, Audhumla. The cow licked the salty ice blocks for nourishment, and as she licked, she revealed another being trapped within the frost, the god Beri. This was a creation born of stark necessity and primal conflict, not divine thought. From Ymir's own body, more giants sprung, while Beri's grandson, the god Odin, and his brothers Vili and Vi, saw the sleeping giant as both a threat and an opportunity. They slew Ymir, and from his colossal corpse they built the entire world. His flesh became the soil, his blood the oceans, his bones the mountains, and his skull the dome of the sky, held aloft by 4 dwarves. This act of cosmic murder, of order carved violently from the body of a primordial being, echoes the Babylonian god Marduk's slaying of Tiamat with a chilling resonance. At the center of this world, they placed a cosmic axis, the immense ash tree Yggdrasil. Its 3 great roots reached down into 3 separate wells, one for the gods, one for the frost giants, and one in the misty realm of the dead. An eagle perched in its highest branches, a dragon gnawed at its roots, and a squirrel ran up and down its trunk carrying insults between them. The tree was everything, the universe itself, a living, suffering entity that bound all the 9 worlds together. It was constantly under attack, rotting from the decay inflicted by the serpent Nidhogg, yet it endured, a symbol of a cosmos perpetually balanced between creation and destruction. The gods themselves were not immortal. They gained their wisdom through painful sacrifice. Odin, the All-Father, hung himself from the branches of Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, in order to grasp the secret of the runes. He also sacrificed his eye for a drink from the well of wisdom, a price paid for knowledge that would help him delay the inevitable. And that inevitable end had a name, Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. This was not a quiet fading, but a cataclysm foretold. It begins with the death of the beloved god Balder, a tragedy engineered by the most unpredictable force in their pantheon, the trickster Loki. Loki was a shapeshifter, a blood brother to Odin, who brought both incredible gifts and utter chaos to the gods. He was the father of monsters, siring the wolf Fenrir, the serpent Jormungandr, and the half-dead goddess Hel. His actions, born of jealousy and spite, set the final doom in motion. When Balder is killed, the bonds of the world loosen. Ragnarök unfolds with a terrifying certainty. The sun and moon are swallowed by wolves, the stars vanish from the sky, and the earth shakes so violently that all fetters break. The monstrous wolf Fenrir runs free with his lower jaw scraping the ground and his upper jaw scraping the sky. The Midgard serpent Jormungandr rises from the ocean depths spewing venom. Loki leads an army of the dead from Hel, and the fire giants of Muspelheim march across the rainbow bridge Bifrost, shattering it. In the final great battle on the field of Vigrid, the gods face their fated opponents. Odin is devoured by Fenrir. Thor slays the Midgard serpent but stumbles only 9 steps away before dying from its venom. The world is consumed by fire, and the earth sinks beneath the waves. This vision of total, fiery annihilation, a complete reset of the cosmos, finds a profound parallel in the great cycles of Hindu cosmology. The Norse Ragnarök is a single, devastating event that ends one age, while the Hindu tradition speaks of 4 great yugas or world ages, each ending in a dissolution before a new creation begins. Both systems share a cyclical view of time, where the universe is not a one-time creation moving toward a final heaven, but a series of births, deaths, and rebirths on a cosmic scale. The Norse cycle ends with a hint of renewal as a new green earth emerges from the water, and a new generation of gods, the sons of the old ones, survive to begin the cycle anew. This echoes the Mayan belief in successive suns, each world destroyed and reborn, and the Aztec conviction that they lived in the 5th and final age. The Norse did not see their destiny as something to be avoided, but as a fate to be met with courage. Their myths taught them that even the gods were bound by the threads of the Norns, and that the greatest glory was to face the end without fear, to fight a battle you know you cannot win, simply because it is the right thing to do. Why would a culture of Scandinavian seafarers and a civilization of Indian philosophers both conceive of time as a great turning wheel of destruction and rebirth? The answer may lie not in a shared event, but in a shared human observation of the world, the endless cycle of day and night, of winter and spring, of life and death, projected onto the canvas of the cosmos itself. In the rugged lands north of Greece, the Thracians forged a fierce warrior culture celebrated for its gold work and horsemanship, yet they left behind a ghost of a written history. What we know of their spiritual world comes largely through the lens of their neighbors, and one figure shines through the obscurity with a singular, haunting melody, the legendary musician and prophet Orpheus. His story is not one of battle, but of a love so profound it challenged the very laws of life and death. When his beloved wife Eurydice died from a snake bite, Orpheus did not rage or despair. He took up his lyre and descended into the underworld, the realm of Hades. His music was so beautiful, so filled with divine sorrow, that it charmed the very stones of the path, soothed the three-headed guard dog Cerberus, and moved the hearts of the deathless gods. Hades and Persephone, rulers of the dead, were brought to tears. They agreed to release Eurydice on one impossible condition: Orpheus must lead her back to the world of the living without once turning around to look at her. It was a test of faith in the divine promise over the evidence of his own senses. He walked the long, dark path, listening for her footsteps behind him until the light of the upper world began to glow ahead. In a moment of agonizing doubt, he turned to assure himself she was there, only to see her form fade back into the shadows forever. This tragic failure, this human moment of uncertainty, became the foundation for one of the most influential mystery cults of the ancient world. The followers of Orpheus, the Orphics, did not see this as just a sad story. They saw it as a profound allegory for the human soul itself. They believed that our true, divine nature is trapped and forgotten in the underworld of the physical body, just as Eurydice was trapped in Hades. Our life on earth is that long walk toward the light, and we must resist the temptation to turn back, to cling to the material world, if we ever hope to achieve liberation. The Orphics taught that the soul was immortal and divine, but locked in a painful cycle of reincarnation, a wheel of suffering and rebirth. This idea of transmigration finds a stunningly precise parallel in the distant philosophies of India, where the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of death and rebirth driven by karma, was already ancient. How could a religious movement in the Balkans and the spiritual traditions of the Indian subcontinent arrive at such a similar, complex understanding of the soul's journey? The Orphic path to breaking this cycle was not through heroic deeds, but through asceticism, secret initiation rites, and a life of ritual purity. Initiates followed strict dietary laws, often abstaining from meat and beans, believing that such practices would free the soul from its earthly prison. Their most sacred texts, whispered only to the initiated, spoke of the primordial god Zagreus, a divine child who was dismembered by the Titans. From his ashes, humanity was born, meaning we all carry within us a tiny, trapped spark of the divine. The goal of the Orphic life was to purify that spark through knowledge and ritual so that after death, the soul could escape the cycle and achieve eternal bliss. This narrative of a dying and reborn god whose fate is tied to humanity's salvation resonates powerfully with the Egyptian story of Osiris, who was also dismembered and whose resurrection promised eternal life to his followers. It prefigures the very themes that would later become central to Christianity. The Orphic mysteries offered something radical for their time, a personal salvation available not just to kings or heroes, but to anyone who underwent the secret rites and lived a pure life. The lonely figure of Orpheus, his music failing to bring his love back but succeeding in revealing the path to the gods, created a spiritual echo that would ripple across the Mediterranean, connecting the cults of the Nile to the philosophers of Greece and beyond, all asking the same timeless question: how does a soul lost in the world find its way back home? The Etruscans saw the entire universe as a sacred text waiting to be read. Long before Rome became an empire, this enigmatic people flourished in the rich lands of central Italy, and their entire civilization was built upon a single, profound belief. They taught that the gods communicated their will through signs embedded in the natural world, and that with the right knowledge, a mortal could interpret this divine language. The most powerful and respected of these arts was haruspicy, the ritual examination of a sacrificed animal's entrails. A specially trained priest, the haruspex, would carefully open the creature, and his focus was not on the meat but on the liver. This specific organ was considered a perfect microcosm of the cosmos, a mirror of the heavens. Its lobes, its gallbladder, its portal vein, every bump and discoloration was a word from the gods. The haruspex would compare what he saw against a bronze model of a perfect, divine liver, a map of celestial harmony. Any deviation from this perfect template, a strange spot, an unusual shape, was a message, a warning of divine displeasure or a prophecy of future events. This practice was not a vague superstition. It was a precise and systematic science of divination, documented in their sacred books and central to all matters of state. The parallels here are startling. This is the exact same practice with the same focus on the liver that was performed by the Baru priests of ancient Mesopotamia 1,000 years earlier and half a world away. How could such a specific and complex ritual appear in two cultures with no documented historical contact? The Etruscans themselves believed their religious knowledge was a divine revelation given to them by a prophetic child who emerged from a furrow in a field. Yet the methodological echo is too precise to ignore, suggesting a possible, forgotten transmission of spiritual technology from the ancient Near East, perhaps through seafaring traders. The Etruscans did not keep this knowledge to themselves. Their most enduring legacy was passing this entire system of divination onto the Romans, who absorbed it completely. The Roman state would never declare war, found a colony, or inaugurate a consul without first consulting the haruspices. The very destiny of the Roman Empire, a civilization that would later stretch from Britain to Babylon, was guided for centuries by a priest reading a sheep's liver, a practice inherited directly from the Etruscans. Their own language remains largely undeciphered, a final mystery, but their greatest secret was not in their words, but in the very organs of the animals they sacrificed, a belief that connected the fate of Italy to the oldest omens of Mesopotamia. Yet while Romans and Etruscans read divine will in the livers of sheep, a different kind of power was being carried across the waves by the greatest merchants and explorers the ancient world had ever known. The Phoenicians, masters of the sea from their city-states like Tyre and Sidon, built a commercial empire that stretched from the coast of Lebanon to the pillars of Gibraltar, and their most enduring export was not purple dye or glass, but the very building blocks of Western thought, the alphabet. They took the complex, syllable-based writing of the Egyptians and Canaanites and stripped it down to a set of just 22 simple symbols, each representing a single consonant sound. This revolutionary system was portable, efficient, and easy to learn, a tool perfectly suited for keeping fast records on a rolling ship or in a bustling foreign port. It was this Phoenician script that the Greeks would later adopt, adding symbols for vowel sounds, which in turn gave rise to the Latin alphabet you are using to read these words right now. But the Phoenicians carried more than letters in their holds. They carried their gods, and none was more important than Melkart, the king of the city of Tyre. He was a god of empire, a patron of colonization and maritime power, but his mythology is shrouded in a mist even thicker than the ocean spray. What we know suggests a powerful deity of death and rebirth, an underworld figure who was celebrated with an annual festival where he was ritually burned and then resurrected in a sacred fire. His name itself means king of the city, and his temples were often built on offshore islands, liminal spaces between the world of the living and the realm of the divine. Now consider the Greek hero Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. His story is one of immense strength, of 12 impossible labors undertaken to atone for a crime, culminating in his death on a funeral pyre and his subsequent ascension to Olympus as an immortal god. The parallels were not lost on the ancient world. As Greek merchants and colonists interacted with Phoenician traders across the Mediterranean, they looked at the powerful god of Tyre and saw their own legendary hero. Both were associated with strength, with founding cities, and with a journey to the underworld. Both were celebrated with fire rituals. The identification became so complete that in many places, from Cyprus to Sicily, they were worshipped as a single, fused deity, Melkart Heracles. Temples to Melkart in foreign colonies became known as temples of Hercules. The Greek historian Herodotus even reported that when he visited Tyre, he saw a temple dedicated to Heracles that was, in fact, the ancient temple of Melkart, and the priests told him it had been built 2,300 years before. This was not a case of simple similarity, it was a conscious, deliberate syncretism, a merging of divine identities for political and commercial convenience. A Greek sailor could pay respects to a familiar face in a foreign port, while a Phoenician merchant could appeal to a local power under a name everyone understood. The line between the Semitic god-king and the Greek hero simply dissolved in the practical world of Mediterranean trade. How does a god change his name without losing his power? He doesn't. He simply reveals that his power was always greater than any one culture could contain. His story, a vessel sturdy enough to sail under any flag. The Phoenicians, these practical masters of the sea, did more than connect markets. They connected heavens, creating a divine hybrid that sailed right into the pantheon of the West. Far across the seas, in the fertile river deltas of Southeast Asia, the Dong Sun culture forged a civilization in bronze. Their most magnificent legacy is not a temple or a pyramid, but a sound, a resonant, echoing tone cast into metal. They produced enormous bronze drums, some standing over a foot tall and spanning more than 3 feet in diameter, objects of such intricate artistry and sophisticated craftsmanship that they have become symbols of an entire era. These were not simple musical instruments. The surface of each drum is a meticulously engraved map of the Dong Sun cosmos. At the very center of the flat top, a stylized star bursts outward, representing the sun, the source of all life. Radiating from this central star are concentric bands filled with a stunning variety of patterns. Geometric meanders dance alongside processions of figures that bring their world to life. We see warriors wearing elaborate headdresses, marching with weapons and drums of their own. We see houses built on stilts, their distinctive architecture preserved in metal. Most strikingly, we see birds, herons, and egrets in flight, symbolizing the connection between the earthly realm and the world of the spirits. The entire surface is a narrative in relief, a permanent record of their daily life, their rituals, and their spiritual beliefs. These drums were the heartbeat of their society, used in vital ceremonies for rain, for fertility, and to communicate with the ancestors. The belief was that the rhythmic pounding on the drum would carry their prayers upward, the vibrations bridging the human and divine realms. This concept of a sacred object that channels communication with the spiritual world is a profound echo of rituals we have seen from the Shang oracle bones to the Maya bowl game. But the mystery of the Dong Sun drums deepens when we look at their connections. The decorative patterns, particularly the repeated spirals and the depictions of birds, bear a striking resemblance to the art found on bronze vessels from the contemporary Yu cultures of southern China. The technology of lost wax casting used to create these masterpieces suggests a shared technological knowledge that flowed along river and coastal trade routes. Some drums have even been discovered in distant islands of Indonesia, suggesting they were prized trade items, their symbolic power valued far from their place of origin. Here, at the very end of our journey through 30 civilizations, we find not an isolated culture, but another knot in the global web. The Dong Sun people, with their unique voice in bronze, were listening to the same fundamental questions about the cosmos, life, and the divine, and they were answering them in a language of art and ritual that feels strangely familiar. Their drums do not just beat a rhythm for their own people, they seem to pulse in time with a deeper, older song, one that was being played across the entire ancient world. From the heart of Sumer to the high Andes, a single, terrifying story of drowning waters repeats with chilling consistency. A council of weary gods, a single virtuous man, a massive boat, a world submerged, and a bird sent to find land. These narrative pillars appear again and again, as if humanity shared a collective nightmare. The details shift, the names of the heroes and gods change, but the core structure of the Great Flood is a foundational memory for dozens of cultures that should have had no way to share it. Is it possible that this points to a real, catastrophic event at the end of the last ice age? A rapid rise in sea levels that drowned continental shelves and coastal plains, a trauma so profound it was seared into the human story everywhere. Or is the flood something deeper, a universal metaphor for chaos overwhelming order, a psychological reset that every civilization must process in its own way? The sheer pervasiveness of the deluge makes it one of the most compelling and unsolved mysteries in our shared past. Just as the flood represents a watery chaos, another symbol rises from the deep to challenge the order of the world, the serpent or the dragon. This is not the fairy tale beast of later European lore, but a primal force of disorder. In Babylon, it is the saltwater dragon Tiamat, slain by Marduk to create the world from her corpse. For the Hittites, it is the serpent Ilianka, defeated by the storm god Tarhana. In the Vedic hymns of India, the storm god Indra smashes the serpent Vritra to release the cosmic waters. The Egyptian sun god Ra battles the serpent Apep each night to ensure the dawn. Even in the Norse myths, the monstrous Midgard serpent Jormungandr encircles the entire world, waiting to rise and poison the sky at Ragnarok. Why is this motif so universal? The serpent, limbless and close to the earth, represents the untamed, chthonic power of the primordial world, the chaos that existed before the gods imposed their will. Its defeat is not just a victory, it is the very act of creation itself, the establishment of a stable cosmos from the formless void. The dragon is the ultimate adversary because it is the embodiment of the world before order, a force that must be conquered again and again to keep the sun rising and the rivers flowing. Then there is the most poignant and hopeful of these shared threads, the story of the dying and resurrecting god. In Egypt, the good king Osiris is murdered and dismembered by his brother Set, only to be pieced back together by his devoted wife Isis, becoming the lord of the dead and the promise of eternal life. Along the Canaanite coast, the storm god Baal is slain by Mot, the god of death, causing the rains to cease and the world to wither, until his avenger sister Anat destroys death itself, allowing Baal to return and restore fertility. We hear echoes in the Mesopotamian tale of Dumuzi, the shepherd god whose annual descent to the underworld brings the scorching summer and whose return heralds the new growth of spring. This is not a story of finality, but of cycle, of life emerging from death as inevitably as the plant rises from the buried seed. It is a mythic expression of the most fundamental rhythm of nature, the turning of the seasons, the death of the old year and the birth of the new. This powerful archetype provided comfort and meaning, explaining the harsh realities of decay and loss not as an end, but as a necessary step in a grand regenerative process. It is a narrative so deeply embedded in the human psyche that it would later form the cornerstone of faiths that now span the globe, suggesting a universal longing to believe that death is not a wall but a doorway. These three great themes, the cleansing flood, the chaotic dragon, and the resurrected god, form a kind of mythological skeleton found across the ancient world. They are the fundamental stories we have always told ourselves to explain where we came from, why the world is both beautiful and terrifying, and what might await us after our final breath. The astonishing part is not that different cultures had myths, but that their most essential myths are built from the same narrative bones. We are left staring at a tapestry of human belief woven with threads of such similar color and texture that it defies any simple explanation of coincidence. The connections are too deep, too structural to be ignored. So what does this incredible web of shared stories truly mean? Does it point to a single, forgotten source, a lost epoch when humanity was one and these tales were first born? Or does it reveal something even more profound about the universal architecture of the human mind, a shared psychic inheritance that causes us to dream the same dreams, to answer the great questions of existence with the same symbolic answers, no matter where on earth we make our home? The evidence is undeniable and spans the entire globe. We find creation born from the body of a slain dragon in Babylon, in India, and in the icy wastes of the Norse world. A great flood drowns humanity in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Popol Vuh of the Maya, and the legends of the Aztecs. Dying and resurrecting gods bring life back to a withered land in the stories of Osiris in Egypt, Baal in Canaan, and the maize god of Mesoamerica. Hero twins descend into the underworld in Maya myth, just as Orpheus does in Greece, and a divine king battles a serpent of chaos in Hittite, Vedic, and Chinese lore. The sheer number of these parallels in cultures separated by oceans and millennia forces a single, monumental question upon us: how is this possible? Three compelling explanations present themselves, each a key that could unlock this ancient mystery. The first is the theory of a common ancestral source, a single, primordial civilization, perhaps lost beneath the rising seas of the last ice age, whose myths and legends were carried by its survivors to every corner of the world, where they took root and evolved into the distinct traditions we know today. The second possibility is extensive, unrecorded prehistoric contact. We know the Phoenicians sailed to Britain, that the Minoans traded with Egypt, and that the Mitanni kings in Syria worshipped Vedic gods. Could this web of connection have been far more vast than our history books dare to suggest, with ancient mariners, traders, and migrants weaving a global network that exchanged stories as freely as spices and obsidian? The final explanation looks inward to the universal architecture of the human mind. Perhaps we are all wired to process the fundamental dramas of existence in the same symbolic language. The terror of a storm, the grief of death, the hope for rebirth, the struggle between order and chaos, these are universal human experiences. Is it any wonder that we would invent similar gods, similar monsters, and similar stories to give them meaning, building our mythologies from the same deep psychological bedrock? The truth may be a tapestry woven from all three threads, a shared ancestral memory of real cataclysms, amplified by millennia of cultural exchange and filtered through our innate human need to tell stories about our place in the cosmos. These 30 civilizations were not isolated islands shouting into the void. They were part of a chorus singing variations of the same ancient songs. The stories of our ancestors are not locked away in the past. They are the echoes of our own deepest questions resonating across time. So what do you believe? Do these threads connect to a forgotten global event, to lost voyages across ancient seas, or to something fundamental within ourselves? The conversation is far from over, and your voice is now a part of it. Share your thoughts on these ancient connections in the comments below, and let's continue unraveling the greatest story ever told.